Hello to everyone. Welcome back to our sessions of Women of the Bible Speak. This is your Pastor Yeti. It's a joy to do this because it's so interesting, so wonderful to go through the story with those special women so a long time ago, and to talk about them, to reveal them in our own personal life. So welcome to all you women out there, whatever denomination. Welcome to the Seeker. You're welcome. So today I'm going to talk about Tamar. It's the both. We're going to mention first is Tamar, and then it will be Ruth. But first, I'm going to talk about Tamar. Maybe the English pronouncement of the name is Tamar, but I will say Tamar. So I hope that is fine with all of you. Write the scriptures down. It's from the book of Genesis 38, the verses 1 to 30th. When we look for inspiring women in the Bible, Tamar's story is not exactly the first one that comes to mind. It's strange and uncomfortable, and Tamar makes choices that, let's face it, can in no way be explained to a children's Sunday school class or whatever class, or maybe also for you out there. So, her story tends to remain a footnote, one we might quickly move past in search of material that's easier to understand and a character who is perhaps easier to relate to. But to fast forward past her would be a shame, because Tamar is a fascinating woman with a story we need to hear. She's an outsider, not part of the family, made up of Abraham's descendants who will become the nation of Israel. And nevertheless, she is part of both David and Jesus' family tree. She's also an example of bold choices and of God's redemptive power in the midst of our messy lives. Her story appears in a kind of interlude in the story of Genesis, and that placement is important. The previous chapter is the beginning of the story of Joseph. It ends with the selling of Joseph into slavery by his envious brothers. The Bible tells us that selling him is Judah's idea, and in Genesis 37, verse 11, that his brothers were jealous of him. And with good reason. They were all sons of Jacob, but Joseph was the firstborn son of the wife Jacob truly loved, Rachel, or in Hebrew, Rachel. Genesis 37, verse 3. Doesn't beat around the bush, telling us that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. So was Judah looking for a way to get rid of Joseph for good? Or was he looking to avert a worse fate? Both. The brothers' original intention was to kill Joseph, but Reuben convinced them to abandon their deadly plan by suggesting that the brothers sell Joseph to a passing caravan of Midianites. Was Judah hoping to save Joseph from his bloodthirsty brothers? Or was Judah in fact the ringleader? Immediately after Joseph is sold into slavery, Judah left his brothers and went to live among the Canaanites. He married a Canaanite woman and had 3 sons by her. He built a life there, away from his father's family. His sons grew up, and eventually he acquired a wife for his oldest son, Er. But Er was apparently no good. Scripture tells us simply that he was wicked in the Lord's sight. Genesis 38, verse 7. It's at this point that Tamar enters the picture. She was the wife of Er, likely married to him as a teenager. Imagine her situation. A very young woman, giving in marriage to a foreigner through no choice of her own. Living in an unfamiliar culture with a husband so wicked that God decided to kill him. After Er's death, custom dictated that his wife be married to his brother. This is known as a Levirate marriage. Liberated from the Levites, the priests. A liberated marriage. Levir is Latin for husband's brother, and it was a custom among many Semitic people of the ancient Near East. It later became enshrined as part of Jewish law in the Torah. The idea behind it is a simple one. If a married man died without leaving behind any sons, it was the duty of his brother to marry the widow and have sons with her. Sons that would be counted as the dead brother's heirs. It was a way of affirming that the dead continued to live and be part of the community they had left behind. And initially, at least, Judah followed this custom. He dutifully gave Tamar in marriage to his second son, Onan. Apparently, Onan was not a fan of the arrangement. There is a selflessness in liberated marriage because the male partner has to be willing to recognize. The firstborn son he produced with his brother's widow as the heir of his deceased brother and not his own. Onan, or Onan, apparently was not so willing. He went through with the marriage in public, but in private he practiced an early form of birth control that meant Tamar would never conceive a son. As the remaining eldest son of Judah, Onan was likely calculated the economic cost of producing an heir for Er. That son would take a portion of the inheritance that would otherwise go to Onan. Fully aware of Onan's selfishness, both physically and economically, God struck him down too. It's at this point that Judah apparently decided that Tamar's seeming barrenness was not the result of the wickedness or selfishness of his own children. It was Tamar. She must be the problem. So he sent her back home to her father's house, making an excuse about his youngest son, Shelah, not being old enough yet to enter into a marriage with her. In reality, Judah had no intention of letting her within 10 miles of yet another son of his. Liberated customs or no, Genesis 38:11 tells us exactly what Judah was thinking. He may die too, just like his brothers. What choice did Tamar have but to obey and trust that Judah would eventually do the right thing? The Bible tells us that Tamar went to dwell in her father's house, but not how she felt about any of this. We don't know if she loved or how she felt about Onan. Maybe she never loved them. She would not have been consulted. Marriages was something arranged by man, a business deal to be struck, like the sale of goats or land. And if Tamar was a business deal, then she had just gone bankrupt. Twice a widow, she now waited to see if her father-in-law would make good on his implication that she would one day become Shilah's wife. The news of Tamar's bad luck had probably spread. Most likely there were whispered rumors and quiet chuckles inside tents about the woman who was so devastatingly unlucky, an object of ridicule. Tamar must have felt the label too, a fatal plague that no one would want to contract. It would have been easy for Tamar to say, well, they must be right about me. I must truly be worthless. And maybe Judah is right. Maybe it really is all my fault that his sons died. Like Job, she could have sat on a dung heap and wailed about her own life had turned out. No marriages, no future, no prospects of any kind of normal life, but being independent in her father's house until the day she died. But that's not what she did. She didn't lose sight of the fact that it was Judah who had done the wrong things, so she formulated a plan. Here is where the story goes off the Sunday school rails, if I may say it like that. Because after realizing that Judah has no plans to join her in marriage with his son Shelah, Tamar decided to trick Judah into sleeping with her. She took off the distinctive clothing of a widow, wrapped herself in a veil, and journeyed to a plan where she knew Judah would pass on his travels. Tamar's face was obscured so that her father-in-law wouldn't recognize her. Assuming she was a prostitute, Judah, who himself had become a widower, at this point said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." She accepted, but drove a hard bargain. He would have to leave a signed ring, cord, and staff until he could return with payment. These details, especially the jewelry, tell us just how wealthy Judah must have been. They give us a glimpse of the power he had, in stark contrast to Tamar's lowly position. More important, such items in those days were a form of identification the closest. Tamar would come to having DNA proof when she needed it. Once they had slept together, Tamar took her father-in-law's ring, cord, and staff, and left before he could recognize her. Judah did try to find her later, sending a friend to deliver the payments and get his things back, but she had vanished. The friend even asked around about her. Hey, what about that prostitute who sits by the side of the road here? But no one had ever heard of such a woman, and Judah was worried he could become a laughingstock. Genesis 38:23. If he pressed the issue. 3 months later, Tamar, now pregnant, was so far along that it could no longer be concealed. Judah was outraged. Genesis 38:24 documents his reactions. Bring her out and have her burned to death, in sending her away from his home. Judah had effectively repudiated her, and he would have been happy never to hear from her again, until she publicly embarrassed him with a pregnancy. He had been happy to ignore her until now. Now suddenly, he cared a lot about what she did and how she made him look. Remember, he was still responsible for her. People must have been whispering, "Isn't that the woman who was?" Yes, to Judah's sons. Oh, poor Judah. The snickers in the tent started up again. Judah was publicly humiliated, and he wanted to make Tamar pay for it, even if that meant putting her to death, for making the exact same error he himself had made just a few months ago. Before that, Tamar sent him an unmistakable message, delivering his signed ring, cord, and staff. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Genesis 38:25. In those times, these items truly would have equated to a paternity test, holding a mirror up to a man's actions. Judah could not deny that they were his. Did he erupt in fury? Did he double down on his resolve to burn Tamar to death, so that no one would ever know of his mistake or his hypocrisy? He did none of those things. Instead, bowing his head and acknowledged the justice of a reproof, he made a remarkable admission. "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." Genesis 38:26. Some translate the Hebrew as simply, "She is righteous." I am not. Judah recognized that the root of the whole tangle was his own decision not to let Tamar marry Shelah. Yes, she behaved immorally, but what if he had dealt justly with her from the beginning? Judah at last admitted that he was the root of the problem, not Tamar. It's a remarkable moment, and it calls to mind another moment when a man of God sins and is called to account for it. In 2 Samuel 12, the prophet Nathan appears before David to confront him for murdering Uriah and sleeping with Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. Like Judah, David didn't explode in rage. he listened, tricked to the heart, and fell at the prophet's feet in repentance. Judah's repentance was even more remarkable, though, because it was not a mighty and well-respected prophet who reproached him, but a woman. A woman. A woman. Pregnant outside marriage, no less. He could have brushed her aside and had her killed, along with her unborn child. But he listened, bowed his head, and admitted that she was right and he was wrong. Tamar, a woman with no power, no standing in her community, and no male protector looking out for her, delivered a power rebuke to Judah and was hurt. We can imagine what she must have felt being escorted into his presence for the first time since their fateful meeting of 3 months before. Did Judah bow his head before her, the mother of his unborn child? Was she feeling vindicated? It would have been easy for Tamar to wait to be brought into Judah's presence and there publicly to announce the truth. After all, wasn't that what Judah deserved? Some good old-fashioned public humiliation. It would have been such a moment of triumph for her. Imagine all the mockery and contempt that had been heaped on her all those years, now heaped on Judah instead. What a tempting thought that must have been. But Tamar chose a different path. She had a message sent privately to him instead. She chose not to be publicly humiliate the man who was trying to have her executed. She invited him to connect the dots and then awaited his decision. This sequence of events reminds us that seeking justice doesn't require humiliation. We can advocate for what is rightly ours without destroying others in the process. Tamar's significance did not end with that moment of truth. She went on to give birth to 2 twin boys, Perez and Zerach. These sons of Judah had an important role to play in salvation history. In the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, we read the genealogy of Jesus. Abraham begot Isaac. Read the family words. Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Matthew 1:1-3. Ram was the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of King David, and so Tamar's little boy, son of an outsider, son of a Canaanite woman, became part of the royal line of the kingdom of Israel. Tamar's name was even invoked in a special blessing we'll see in our next story, Ruth 4:12. But this was the genealogy not just of David, but of David's divine descendants, Jesus. Tamar is part of that lineage and is one of only 3 women named in Matthew's genealogy. Tamar helps make the Messiah possible, and this non-Jewish Canaanite outsider who was pregnant out of wedlock and faced a certain death became the ancestress of Christ. Tamar's story has significance within the narrative of Genesis 2. Remember that her story happens in the middle of Joseph's story. The narrative suddenly pauses to give us this seemingly random interlude with Judah and Tamar. Joseph's story picks back up immediately after the birth of Perez and Zerach, continuing without interruption for the rest of the book of Genesis. At first glance, it makes no sense to find this illicit story shoehorned into Joseph's. What does this sordid tale have to do with anything? Judah gives us a clue. When Joseph was thrown into the empty pit by his bloodthirsty brothers, it was Judah who came up with the idea to sell him away. It was Judah who said, "Let's get rid of him." But at the conclusion of the story, when Joseph's frail, elderly father, Jacob, faced the possibilities of sending his beloved son Benjamin away into Egypt, it is Judah who steps forward. Then Judah said to Jacob, his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." Genesis 43, 8 verse 9. When they arrived in Egypt, the worst appeared to have happened. The capricious governor, in reality their brother Joseph in disguise, demanded that they leave the helpless young Benjamin with him. Judah put his own life on the line. "Take me instead of him," he pled with the governor, Genesis 44:33, offering his own life for his brothers. It was Judah who had grown and changed the most of all the brothers. But why? What explains the change from the angry, vengeful young man of the beginning of the story to the mature, compassionate man at the end? Was it his humbling before Tamar? Tamar's actions forced Judah to confront his own wrongdoing. Probably for the first time, Judah learned what it was to say in public, "I was wrong." Tamar showed him the way of righteousness and how to be a person who stands for right when no one else has the courage. There is an ancient Jewish tradition that says that to publicly shame another person is the same as committing murder, because regardless of your reasons, you have murdered that person's reputations forever. It is the sort of teaching that reminds us to be careful with our words. But which of us in Tamar's shoes could have resisted the temptations to make sure Judah got a little of what was coming to him? Tamar's story is a beautiful illustration of how God can redeem even the most ill-advised human plans. Tamar likely felt abandoned and may have had many different motivations: justice, desperation, an attempt at preserving the life she thought she was going to create. But hadn't she seen God deal with wrongdoers in the past? It cost both her husbands their lives. A widow seducing her father-in-law in order to become pregnant seems like an irredeemable plan at first blush. But God is masterful at making good out of our messes. Tamar's story is woven into the fabric of the lineage of Jesus Christ. No matter how unfaithful we may be, God is always working in each of our stories, able not only to heal us, but also to use our human frailty to miraculous ends. What a remarkable story, right? Amazing. Maybe for some out there, very new. Maybe you never had the chance to read about Tamar. Interesting how she brought a wonderful justice and how Judah humbled himself. Well, bring it to our lives. We have a lot to think about it, right? Tamar. Okay, so next comes up is Ruth, but that's for another session. It's so wonderful how God uses people's lives to make a huge of a turn, to bring them to the exact of the journey that He wants for their lives. She was a Canaanite. She was an outsider. It's wonderful to see that God brings people in a line and coming in the line of our Christ. Two outsiders, Tamar and Ruth, that some of them we know. It's not our place to judge, because Christ came for the world. So let our eyes be right to see and our hearts full of compassion for everyone, that we are the instruments to allow others to come, and that people can be saved and healed and walk their journey. May the peace of God be with you and stays with you, and may His light shine upon you and keep you safe. God bless you. Have a wonderful day and enjoy life. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye-bye.